Welcome to Eye for Iran, where we take you beyond the headlines that matter most to Iran. Has the Islamic Republic entered a new era? The war may be over, at least for now, but the debate over the Islamic Republic's future is only beginning. For the first time in years, establishment figures are openly discussing ideas once considered unthinkable, including the future of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC. Could one of the pillars of the Islamic Republic be reinvented? Or is this simply a new strategy to preserve the same system?
What's in a name? Is the Guard Corps the Guard Corps or is it not?
The question isn't whether they're engaging in soul searching. They have to.
That may very well spell their final doom once and for all.
Meanwhile, millions of Iranians are grappling with economic hardship and uncertainty, and yet Instagram is filled with dance videos from Iran. What is it like for the people of Iran?
The situation is absolute disaster.
Neither peace nor war situation is what is causing a lot of anxiety because people can't make any decisions.
And while some speak of change, one of Iran's oldest Protestant churches is facing seizure by the Islamic Republic.
It's one of the first Persian-speaking churches in modern history.
So where is Iran headed? I'm Negar Moshahedi, and this is Eye for Iran. Well, welcome everyone to our panel today. It's great to have everyone on board.
Great to be with you.
Hello.
Great.
Thank you for having us.
Awesome. So I just wanted to start off with Mehdi Khoratian. He's a political analyst aligned with the hardliners, close to Iran's hardline establishment. He said that some insiders within the Islamic Republic are openly discussing dismantling the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC. And just months ago, that is something to even talk about it is unimaginable. So Alex, I'll start with you. Just how significant is this moment?
Look, to be honest, I don't know what to make of that claim. I haven't seen any evidence to suggest to me that this is a serious piece of news that is worth sort of digging into. I cannot believe that at this moment, anyone inside the Iranian regime thinks they can park their Revolutionary Guards, outside the regime tent, if you will, and move on with life and cut deals with the Americans and what have you. So I suspect, if you are so-called reformist moderate in this Iranian system today, you might definitely want to try and influence where the guards are going in terms of their calculations. But the idea that you exclude the guards or to sort of dismantle the guards, that could be a aspirational, goal down the road. But I don't think anybody seriously would make that claim today, as Iran, in this very delicate moment of transition, is still essentially, at best, in a situation of ceasefire. So to do anything like that, to me, it's very unlikely anything serious is being done along these lines, which takes me to the core kind of part of your question, essentially. Why did he say that? What's the point? Yeah. I think this is all about domestic politics. There are many individuals who claim to be journalists, analysts, who show up on various platforms in Iran and say certain things. And to really understand what they're saying is to understand whose agenda they're trying to push forward. And I suspect what he's doing is the particular interest group that he is affiliated with, and this, idea that he's now floated out there without any serious backup. Let me stop by saying this. All he said was, I know. He said in Persian, I know this is going on. I have sources, but he didn't actually provide any evidence of that. It's a big claim he's making without any evidence. At this point, I think it's too spurious, to be honest. And I'm not taking it that seriously as of yet.
And one theory that's out there is that kind of restructuring or rebranding the IRGC, which has become a huge liability for the Iranian regime, would make it easier to engage both economically and diplomatically with the outside world by distancing itself from this brand. How plausible, Behnam, do you think that is? And especially given Article 150 of Iran's constitution, and this, of course, the IRGC being the identity of the Islamic Republic, there to guard the Islamic Revolution.
Sure. Let me, and great to be with you all. Let me zoom out before I zoom in, and just say, as a young man in Washington, I have a lot of self-destructive habits, a lot of unhealthy habits. One of those unhealthy habits is actually listening to Iranian podcasts. not this one, but podcasts in Iran. And that's,
Join
where
the
I
club.
used guilty. And that's where I used to follow, actually, Mehdi Kharatian. He's actually very prolific in the somewhat new Iranian podcast space, which is a very interestingly, largely a YouTube phenomenon rather than other social media that the regime has. And it's a fascinating space because I don't want to use the word open in the liberal or democratic sense, but it's a more permissive environment for political debates, but political debates that are actually, in my view, controlled. I think in this podcast environment, there's a lot of trial balloons going on from various fractions of the regime, and it's a real um, it's a real proof that the Islamic Republic is trying to use everything it can to sustain itself. And the debate, the personalities, the discourse, the quality, the content is drastically different than the stereotype someone in Washington might have of what Iranian hardline political elites think based on one or two images from the 1980s. It is actually an indicator to me of a much more dangerous adversary because it's a much more competent and conversant adversary. And I think Mehdi Kharatian's comments both on that podcast, Tamam Roch, as well as much more recently on this other podcast called Azad, which I think the audience should know about this Azad podcast, regardless of their political orientation, because Azad was the one that bragged about fostering the interview between Iranian President Pezeshkian and American podcaster Tucker Carlson just recently as well, I think last year or the year before. So this is a fascinating space to watch, and therefore, like Alex said, there's lots of things that are said where it'd be really hard to put evidence to, but also they represent a vector of a debate that actually doesn't exist inside the country. It doesn't exist in the newspapers. It doesn't exist in other forms of social media. It doesn't exist among the facts on the ground, the political elite and the social forces behind that elite driving and making fractious domestic politics in Iran. It is actually elite opinion and controlled elite opinion designed to put things into our debate. And then sometimes you'll get some gems from this debate. Kharatian also, I think within the same week or a week and a half of that podcast, was on a different podcast, also Persian language one. And I'm just going to say this in Persian because it sounds funny, but he understood so well the U.S. kind of domestic obsession with the midterms, and he said, America must lose, Trump must lose at least one of the houses, and he said if Trump doesn't lose one of the houses, he said Trump he basically Trump will come crush us for lack of a better word. So this is the fluency of this individual in the adversary's domestic politics, and he's performing something in his domestic politics for an elite audience designed to have these conversations and have us focus, I think, on the noise rather than on some of the signals. So I find this to be a very controlled comment, totally at odds with everything you said legally, politically, and ideologically about this entity. And hey, we're about to go into this period, the Khamenei funeral right now, that is actually going to show the marriage of the religious elements of the state that are still there. Yes, we've been dealing with missiles and launchers and guys in uniform for quite a few years now in the Middle East. But that is about to be remarried because I still believe it's about the partnership in power. And if the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps is going to change anything, it's going to have to change the system in its entirety. And it's not going to have to be the Islamic Republic. And playing footsie with a name or a brand, I think, as I said earlier, only reminds one of that Shakespeare comment from Romeo and Juliet. What's in a name? Is the Guard Corps or is it not?
So then who's the noise for, Behnam?
I think it's for us. I think it's for the Western debate. And I think it's designed secondarily to have an influence on the Iranian debates. Somewhat controversially, despite the much more fractious noise that we hear in Iran about the MOU, I actually think that, the institutions and the personalities that matter in Iran, I actually think that there is more cohesion because there's less people. It's much more sink together or swim together. The decisions are controversial. There's a lot more noise again. Kharatian, Hamid Rasai, Nabavian. It's louder, but that which is louder is not necessarily emblematic. What is emblematic is the alleged Mojtaba letter defending diplomacy, Saeed Jalili coming in and defending Mojtaba, Yadullah Javani of the IRGC coming in to defend diplomacy. These are the stakes that matter. So I think it's designed to, one, kind of plant a flag on the hard right of the Islamic Republic, and then two, throw something out there in the West, a little bit of cover, a little bit of denial and deception. This is fundamentally an information war. And if the 40-day war between Iran, Israel, and America, where this regime was putting out Lego videos and focusing on posters in streets, didn't tell you how much of an information war it is, I don't know what will.
And at the same time, we've got Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf. He is the Speaker of the Parliament. He's also the man behind all the negotiations and dealing with U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance. And as well as he seems to have consolidated power with Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi and the President Pezeshkian, for now at least. He was doing an interview on state TV where he was abruptly cut off, actually, and it went to black. And he was talking about the MOU and discussing Iran's frozen assets. Does that suggest any genuine divisions inside the Islamic Republic's establishment, Shahram?
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Negarjan, for having me. Any difference that has existed between any of these people, in my opinion, has always been one of in degree rather than in kind. Tactics are different. Worldviews, strategies, expectations, and demands are all the same. The other thing is that I think the Islamic Republic has, ever since the reform movement of Khamenei, has thrived on projecting an image of diversity within itself, and that there are different factions and engaging people in typologies that this faction is now doing that faction is now going to do that. To be honest with you, in my opinion, the Islamic Caliphate after Muhammad was far more diverse than whatever the Islamic Republic has ever been. The thing is that the fact that Mousavi and Karoubi, who were like supposedly reformist candidates, ended up under house arrest, this actually reinforced that view. Now we see that there are especially people who are doing the bidding of the Islamic regimes, in my opinion, talking points and propaganda narrative. It is in their interest to exaggerate such differences. But in the end of the day, Araghchi and Ghalibaf fought. They were comrades, literally comrades in arms of Zulqadr and Wahidi in the war front as members of the IRGC. I mean, how can anybody forget that? When Khatam al-Anbiya reconstruction headquarters that basically has become the racket for all government construction contracts over the past 30 years, was built up, all of these people, through various corporations that FDD has basically created a detailed catalog of, as Winston would put it, wicked and the grisly have been sucking up the blood of the oil revenue of the country. I do not. Yes, there are no honor. There is no honor amongst thieves, no doubt. But if we want to use any psychology to understand the differences between these people, in my opinion, we'd better use the criminal psychology that FBI uses to profile the heads of the mafia or cartel bosses. I think that is a better approach to understand these people, except that they have a country, they have a government in power, and yes, if the matter comes to a head in terms of really thinking that, what you're doing is going to destroy us, and we don't want you, Ghalibaf is yet another pawn. They would remove him, they would remove Araghchi, they would replace them with someone else. The thing is that everything that Behnam and Alex have said and all these podcasts are indicating to me, and I'm going to wrap it up here, they show clearly that the regime no longer has a final decision maker in the person of an authoritative, autocratic supreme leader. Whether this person is dead or not, he does not, he cannot rally his top brass. These people are trying to think aloud and are using the fog of this propaganda to confuse us while they are thinking out loud as to what their next step would be.
Alex, do you agree that there is no final decision maker at this point? And then I've heard you describe today's political landscape as hardliner versus hardliner. Tell us a little bit about, the best way to describe the situation right now more broadly. When you look at the war and the recent signing of the MOU, has that fundamentally changed the Islamic Republic in the sense that those in the top brass leadership have concluded that, the pre-war model is no longer sustainable? And what does that say, I guess, for the future of this regime?
Yeah, I mean, Nigarjan, that is exactly one of the central questions here. I mean, we're Shahram, myself, Behnam, and you, good self, we're all kind of trying to make sense of this. So many moving parts. We're speculating. The best we can point to isn't the specifics. It's the trend lines that we can see. And, if you look at the last 47 years of the history of the Islamic Republic, there have been moments where they had to take a step back and at least try and see if they could engage in anything that looked like soul searching and maybe go in a different direction. The end of the Iran-Iraq war was one of those moments. Rafsanjani and his crowd at the time basically said, look, what you're doing in foreign affairs is killing any hope for economic reconstruction. Now, he did a terrible job bringing about détente with the West. He was all over the place. He was just trying to satisfy, different interest groups. Just very quickly, I'm working on a book project right now, Iran's Arab Strategy. And, in 1990, Rafsanjani had just been president for only months. He really wants to reach out to the rest of the world, say this system is actually not that crazy and radical as you think. So he shows up in Khartoum, Sudan, of all places, and embraces the newly Islamist governor over there that was housing the likes of Osama bin Laden. Obviously, the Saudis, the West, everybody panicked. And Rafsanjani couldn't understand why they didn't trust him when he said Iran had changed. My point is, the intentions are one thing, but they're actually competent enough to go about it is a different. I'm not saying this regime is incompetent, because nothing incompetent can survive for half a century. Yeah. There's definitely a lot of competence here, but you also shouldn't exaggerate in terms of the clarity of mission. So right now, Ali Khamenei, after almost 37 years in power, is gone. Is there a clarity of vision in what's left of the collective leadership in terms of where to go from here? Let's listen to someone like Ghalibaf, who's on national TV, and he's basically saying it's time for us to deliver economic services to our people. That's what they want. Should I take him at his word? Is he serious when he says that? I hope he is, but is he? Or is he sort of manufacturing this sort of pipe dream for us to be distracted and forget about what happened in January when the same regime killed tens of thousands of people that it allegedly today wants to give services to? So
same people.
Right. So I'm saying the question for me is, the question isn't whether they're engaging in soul searching. They have to. You don't say goodbye to a supreme leader who was there for 37 years and you know exactly where you're going. That's not the case with the Islamic Republic. There's been division in this system from get-go. From before Khomeini landed from Paris, there were divisions. There were divisions at Mehrabad airport when they were waiting to greet the old man when he arrived. So that's been true for the history of the Islamic Republic. The question is, can they get themselves together and come to a better decision in terms of turning the system into something different? Less militancy, less Islamism, less killing, more focus on what Ghalibaf allegedly is claiming would be his preferred focus, economic development. Now he's made himself into the chief envoy of the relations with China. Maybe he's hoping he can get something out of the Chinese for that same effort. But I'm not sure where they're going to go. I don't think they know where they're going to go. But also, and I'll stop here, I'd love to hear what Behnam and Shahram have to say about this. We also know this regime, it can be extremely vindictive. When the knives are out within the regime, they go after each other in vicious ways. We've seen so many examples of that over the years. And that's the other thing to look out for. And on top of all this, we really don't know where Mujtaba Khamenei is, his capacity to engage in decision making. And that's obviously going forward is going to be an issue for this regime, because if he can't stay in hiding forever. You cannot be a supreme leader in the Islamic Republic and issue statements every few weeks. That's not going to cut it. His father became supreme leader because he could command that microphone, because he was out there week after week and became the persona he became. So you can't do this from hiding. So once the funeral is over in a few weeks' time, we have to start maybe paying more attention to whether Mujtaba actually dares come out. I mean, this what we've heard today saying, the officials in Tehran warning against attacks on officials. It could be pretext for saying that's the reason why Mujtaba is not showing up for his father's funeral. But
he wasn't there for his wife's ceremony either.
Right, but it's not going to cut it in the long term. You need that. Otherwise, the divisions in the Islamic Republic, particularly as we have a generational shift as well underway. I mean, the Mohsen Rezais, the Rahim Safavis, the even Ahmad Vahidis of this world are getting too old to be on the top job. There will be a jockeying for positions, and that could be one that turns nasty, because again, the regime has done this to itself in the past and could do it again once war conditions subside. Maybe they start going after each other. Again, as you can hear, I'm speculating on all sorts of directions, but frankly, that's the best we can do.
So, Behnam, I'll start with you, and then Shahram, what do you make of the question that Alex posed? And as the threat of war recedes, are we going to get, are the knives going to come out? And is the infighting something genuine that could potentially either transform this regime, maybe into more of a oligarchy type system that disguises a theocracy, if you will, or maybe topple the regime?
I'm reminded of the quote by former Ayatollah Montazeri, who said the Islamic Republic is neither Islamic nor a republic. And so when we talk about the theocratic element, I really do think it is fundamentally misunderstood, because it is indeed, as Shahram was talking about, run in this more oligarchic mafia style. There are always different concentric circles of power, and the 37-year legacy of Ali Khamenei was to take this personalist kind of crude mafia where your son is the consigliere or the gatekeeper, like Ahmad Khomeini was, and there's these different circles that come in and out of the debate of a traditional Shia marja, but a traditional Shia marja has basically taken Karl Marx, the Quran, and Plato and put it together and created a political system on top of that and grafted it onto 2,500 years of a government in Iran that prefers central authority. There's all these contradictions there. And so, it is not straight dope Islamic theocracy. And to that end, I think the promotion and the ascendancy of the military and political and social forces that we see from the Islamic Republic today, chief amongst them the IRGC and the class of veterans from the Iran-Iraq War, that is here to stay. The problem with the West, which has an attention deficit disorder of this, is that it didn't see the origins and the evolution, and it only sees the future when it's really only really kind of nude and apparent and in front of you when the emperor has no clothes. Oh yeah, this might be a military dictatorship. Yeah, it's a military dictatorship, but it has elements that make it distinct from military dictatorships across the third world during the Cold War, in Asia, Africa, Latin America, and what have you, particularly given the orientation of some of these dictatorships. This is the anti-American one. It has a strong ideological basis in this kind of hybrid third worldist, Islamist, leftist ideology. And I think that's here to stay. And I think it is a real battle within this regime of how best to preserve the prerogatives and the privileges of power while also sacrificing as little as possible on the ideology. And here I think it is totally possible that you see the government just limp along. The government doesn't have to answer the question that Alex posed, because I can't answer it either. And I'm at least willing to be honest about it, but I think if the government in the Islamic Republic is honest about it, it has political consequences. And then indeed the knives will be out. But what will come, deal or no deal, war or no war, is the fog of war from the current conflict, from the current crisis will dissipate, just like the fog of war will dissipate here. Now, maybe someone can very charitably say, oh, Ghalibaf has seen the fog of war dissipating more clearly than others and is trying to take this system in this direction to preserve it. But I wouldn't mistake Ghalibaf's opportunism for moderation or even, pragmatism. There is a real difference here. This is, he's been auditioning for this Bonapartist role for at least 2 decades when he said, I'm a Hezbollahi Reza Khan, way back in like 2005, 2006. I think he said that. This is the direction he's been trying to take the system, much like, not because he cares, I think, about the citizenry, but because he thinks this is the best vehicle with which to consolidate power. And I think today, to understand who the knives will be out for, because I do believe they will be coming. You're right. The question, I think that's as it passes prologue, it will be, but it's about intra-group disputes rather than inter-group, because the Islamic Republic has been narrowing for 4 decades, and now it's got its couple of main groups at the helm, and now it's about the debates within themselves. And it reminds me of that Kissinger quote, and yeah, I agree with Shalom, it's about tactics, but it reminds me of that Kissinger quote about academia, why the fights are so lethal is because the stakes are so small. You know, the differences among different generations of IRGC, the differences among the veterans, you know, they both are interested in the preservation, protection, and defense of the Islamic Republic. But even the stylistic differences can have a great substantive impact as to how this regime chooses to adjudicate it. But I think highly likely they'll have the fights, they'll try to sweep it under the rug, and they'll try to do all of it at once, and they won't be able to do any of it well at once, which will mean we'll be back to what the regime was between the 12-day war and the protests in January and the war here, which is failing state status. And failed states or failing states don't have perfect politics, even if the elite in 1 or 2 areas are cohesive.
Shahram, we'll close with you. Wanted to get your final thoughts on that. And before I do, Behnam, you have the best quotes, I have to say. You
I
keep
wish
them
they were
coming.
mine. There were Kissinger quotes or Bonaparte quotes, and Mekki Alibov quotes.
Well, you will remember very good ones. Shahram, what do you think?
Well, I think it's quite apt to refer to this as a failing state. The only question that I have is that, you know, I worked as a research assistant for a year at Rafsanjani's planning and budget organization with Bayazid Mardukhi, who was a Shah's era economist and a person of Kurdish heritage. And I've been studying this regime for over 30 years by that account. When has this regime not been a failing state by the standards of normal states? Can somebody tell me? What astonishes me is that people whose parentage worked as academia and close to the imperial court and are now academics in the Washington Beltway area. I'm not going to name names. No, I'm not. The spotlight here belongs to the 3 of us. I'm not going to name names. But those people, when in certain private circles, they say that, oh, maybe this is the China moment or some crazy thing like that. If you consider Mousavi and Karoubi as Deng Xiaopings of this regime or Zhao Jiang of this regime, well, they are not in power. At least those people were able to make a comeback and show themselves, and they had the support, most importantly, the support of the People's Liberation Army of China. They did not, these people are basically nobodies. Ahmadinejad is a nobody. So all these talks about how this regime is going to change itself, I think it's absolutely nonsensical. We will just see a variation on the theme. But because we are on the survival kind of theme here, these people have survived all the travails and tribulations of this regime. Hence, they are the most survivalist one. If they want to restructure this regime in such a manner that it would endanger the turfs that are highly asymmetrical and decentralized at the same time, there will be a civil war. Mark my words. They are not going to do that, in my opinion. These people have not survived without cause. They are going to find a way. And the problem is this. They have become so rigid that if they embark upon reforming and repackaging and restructuring this system, they will collapse. they are so, I would say, at loggerheads with the rest of the world that if they do not change themselves massively and restructure themselves, they may collapse. So what they will choose to do, they will try to keep the status quo going and keep surviving until such time. And following what Alex has said, the reason why, in my opinion, at least 50% of the case is this: they have survived so far. Alex, John, I do not believe that this is because they were necessarily competent. It is because the West did not have the will to confront them, even at the level that the West confronted the Soviet Union. Lest we forget that Gorbachev told President Reagan that you want to give us some of the technology of the Star Wars, you're not even giving us the technology for the milking machines for cows. How can we trust you? This regime, every time things have opened far more than they were open for the Soviet Union, has basked in it and has gone on an assault in the region to destabilize the region. And then the West has decided that, oh, maybe they are less worse of an evil than ISIS is, than Al-Qaeda is. So they have constantly presented themselves that, oh yeah, we are a bunch of criminal gangsters, but you can still do business with us. And if they can keep this going, unfortunately, they will stay in power because the West does not have the will to be done and over with them the way it was with the Soviet Union.
Anyone have any final concluding thoughts before I let you all go?
No,
Alex?
I very quickly, I obviously respect everything Jarom has to say, but I just want to point out, I understand exactly what he means about the Western stance, but fundamentally, I think that the solution to the problem of the Islamic Republic has to come from within Iran. And I think the last few months have proven that beyond anything else we've seen. It has to be an Iranian solution to an Iranian problem. And for us to sit and wait for the West to come up with some kind of a, silver bullet, we're just going to spend another God knows how long waiting, because that's just not how I think it's going to work out. So I also want to say one final quick thing. Look, I don't know where this system is going to go, but the fact is they were attacked twice in the course of 9 months.
Yeah.
Good reason, bad reason, doesn't matter. If you're in the business of surviving, you don't want this to happen to you again, maybe this is the moment you change course. You don't do it because you love the people of Iran or you do it as a favor. You do it because you want to survive, because you have nowhere to hide. You have nowhere to go. So I do wonder if that's going to maybe, again, huge if, I don't know. But what I do know is the Death to America slogan for a long time didn't cost you anything. Your program, a nuclear program, didn't cost you. Now you got the Israeli-American Air Force over the skies of Tehran. I do wonder if that's going to change calculations, particularly now there is a window of opportunity with death of Ali Khamenei. And again, this is a system that fundamentally I think is more of a survivalist than ideological, whatever is left of the ideology. Whether there's a criminal element to this, the mafia state, all that, it can be true at the same time. If they want to survive this moment today, after what's they've experienced last year, might just give them ground to do some serious thinking. I might be hoping here too much, but I don't think it's too far-fetched to think that that might actually happen.
Behnam, and also I wanted to ask, now that you've mentioned that, Alex, even if they do change to survive, let's say that change is largely potentially cosmetic, wouldn't it fundamentally alter their identity of the Islamic Republic and lead to some sort of evolutionary change? Wouldn't it fundamentally, even if you do have cosmetic change and not something that's of substance, wouldn't that change you somehow?
It could. I think it's unlikely in the short term because they're not even going to offer a cosmetic change plus a pathway to help you turn something transactional into transformational, in my view. But I don't know how much time we have. I know we're in the red already, so I'll be very brief. You mentioned quotes and me remembering random things. Shahram was talking about certain people in D.C. In the back of my head, I just had Ahmadinejad at the parliament podium saying, "Big M, Big M." So I was just, I couldn't help if I wasn't laughing, but I was just thinking of that this entire time.
Thank you.
No, obviously no moral comparison. I was just thinking about, the kind of the symbolism there.
At
Alex,
least say that I'm more handsome than Ahmadinejad.
oh, definitely. but
You're
but
going
that
after
reminds me of a British TV, like a Blackadder joke about how ugly people are presented handsomely. And he says he's more. It's the Mr. Bean character, Rowan Atkinson. He says he's more than a monkey that's been put into a suit and strategically shaved. And I remember American friends would ask me about what I thought about Ahmadinejad growing up in New York, stone's throw from the UN, and I would give them this line from Rowan Atkinson, Blackadder: "He's more than a monkey that's been put into a suit and strategically shaved." But I've taken the conversation far off the rails. I just want to respond to one thing that Alex has said. It does have to be a domestic option, but I think the 47-year history of the battle between the state and the street in Iran is proof that alone that isn't a sufficient option. It is proof that the street has been trying, society has been trying to do everything from, I mean, look at the history of the Islamic Republic. Upon founding, there was armed insurrection. Then there was some, pro-regime groups that defected and fled. There was some that went and supported a foreign aggressor in a territorial war. Then there was a period of the costs of the war dampening all protests against the state from society, economic reconstruction. Then there was the prospect of reform, try to work by, with, and through the system. Decades of attempts of Iranians to try to nudge things along internally. If this state would have bended, it would have bended at a time when it was less costly for that ideology, when they could have done something between transactional and transformational. Now I think we're in a position where the survivalist elements of the regime, survivalism, I don't think will mean, drink the poison chalice. I think we just went through a gigantic social science experiment where someone charismatically, politically, and religiously less qualified than the founding father, Khomeini, so now Khamenei, refused to do the pragmatic thing that his more empowered predecessor would do, which is to drink from the poison chalice. And I actually think the slope or the availability of that option for Iranian leaders will diminish over time, so long as the Islamic Republic is in power. So I actually think the people who have the strongest voice now and who will actually present their option in the language of survival, given the facts that Alex said about the number of attacks and how the gray zone strategy didn't pay off, and hey, your nuclear strategy didn't pay off, is they will frame escalation as survival. And that will come from within the depths of the security services and the depths of the deep state. And they don't need a supreme leader who may or may not be alive or may not be conscious to be able to pull that off. Because they will say, hey, look, we had our Haybat, our Khamenei destroyed in the 12-day war, but we restored it in the 40-day war, and we fought drastically differently. And we did things that were uncommon for the Islamic Republic. We played to the edge. We, went past limited war. We went out of the gray zone. We literally did things that they thought we would have reserved for existential moments. So that's why I actually think now the core that wants to survive, it's not like people who want to survive and they're on a sinking ship are calm, cool, collected, and rational. That's when the flailing and the flashing and the dangerous moments start. So actually, I think, yes, the survivalist instinct will kick in, but the people telling the regime the playbook for survival will be the worst of the worst, the deepest of the deep state, the guardians of the revolution, aka the IRGC, and their playbook will be this escalatory strategy. It doesn't mean that doesn't come with Ghalibaf. It doesn't mean it doesn't come without Ghalibaf. It means that is the general trend, I think, of the discourse. And one of the real lessons learned of the 40-day war, the 67-day ceasefire, and the several-week MOU.
Can I just have 30 seconds,
Sure.
Nagorka?
Please, yeah, go ahead.
You see, the thing is that it has been 126 days since Khamenei was killed, and when they will have him buried, supposedly, it will be 126 days. In the end, even a dialectic materialist ideological worldview of the Soviet Union, it was not the West that planted Gorbachev there. And Gorbachev was a survivalist. He wanted to make sure that the Soviet Union survives. The point is that it was the coup against Gorbachev that really brought down the Soviet Union. The thing is that if Ghalibaf and his ilk managed to get the upper hand, and then there is a question of really battle for who is the top, I don't know, hyena in this pack, then maybe if this ceasefire in the form of the protracted on and off conflict that is ongoing between the US and the Islamic Republic would be a blessing in disguise. Because if Ghalibaf starts to basically prosper from his fortunes and the fortunes of MOU and get an upper hand, then the rest of the gang would feel completely insecure, and that intra-conflict then would materialize into a hot conflict within them, and that may very well spell their final doom once and for all.
Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us today on Eye for
Thank
Iran. Well, with the Islamic Republic's leadership debating the future of the system, millions of Iranians are focused on something much different and more immediate: the economy, the security, and their well-being. Joining us now is Iran international reporter Mariam Sinai and Iranian writer and human rights expert Omid Shams. Thank you so much to you both for being here. So, Mariam, let's start with you. As a reporter and with your connections inside Iran, what is the mood like in general with Iran right now?
Well, most people I speak to say uncertainty and deep frustration dominate their lives. Many also say, both in private conversations and online, that they have little or no hope in the future. It's a grim mood, I can say.
It's a very dark picture right now. It's also what I've been hearing as well, that people are kind of stuck between a life that they can't go back to before the trauma of January 8th and 9th and then the war, and also a life that they want to have in the near future and they thought that maybe they could have but isn't there. So it's like they're stuck in between two different worlds and they don't know what to do. And a lot of people are even planning kind of an exit strategy. Omid, as inflation surges and the recent war has reportedly, I believe, pushed 2 million people out of work, what are the living conditions right now in Iran?
Well, it's quite clear that the situation is absolute disaster, especially when it comes to economy and the the financial hardship that people have already been suffering from, and now it's been worsened. And most importantly, is the uncertainty that you see among the market and businesses. So even if for some of these businesses, small businesses especially, it was possible to reconstruct, to rebuild, and start working again, because of the unpredictable future and the situation that is quite uncertain. It's almost impossible for them. It's impossible for investors to invest. It's impossible for any kind of entrepreneurship to work actually in a way that it would work anywhere else. So the situation is, I would say, the whole economy is in coma. So that is the biggest problem that people are now facing.
Wow. So, Mariam, to expand on that in terms of the kind of the worries right now in Iran, what would you say? Is it another war, the repression that is coming from the regime, the economy, like Omid said, or simply just the future? Because, it's like I see two different sides of Iran, two parallel universes almost coexisting at the same time. I see these videos on Instagram of dance parties and raves at coffee shops in Tehran and just people being people, rollerblading and having fun. And then I see the reality that millions of Iranians face, where I'm hearing that the price of chicken is so expensive they can't afford to eat meat or rice, which is a staple for us Iranians. And people are actually losing weight as a result. So what is the reality right now in Iran, and what is the biggest concern, I guess I could say, people have?
Actually, the working classes, they're bearing the brunt of the economic hardship or everything. Uh, Even from official figures, we can see that, like, the consumption of dairy products has hugely dropped. It started a few years ago, but it's going down and down because people can't even afford, you know, buying dairy. They just have to do with bare minimums. Uh, the biggest concern I feel, is another war. It's at the top of the list. But maybe even more than that, the continuation of the present neither peace nor war situation is what is causing a lot of anxiety, because people can't make any decisions about their lives, about their businesses, education, anything. Everything, it seems to be in limbo. They are just waiting and waiting and waiting to see what happens. Uh, Very few people I talk to are optimistic about the future, because despite the signing of the memorandum, a comprehensive agreement with the US looks far from being certain, given the demands that both sides have. And people are also very concerned about repression, because particularly if a deal is struck with the US, authorities can focus on the domestic dissent and put more pressure on people. They already do, but they can increase it because their hands will be open. You also mentioned raves and dance parties, etc. But as you said, what we see on social media can be very misleading. Only a fraction of the population can even afford restaurant meals now. They are struggling very hard to make ends meet. So generally, the situation is the worst it has ever been. Even during the Iran-Iraq war, it was nothing like this.
Yeah.
People still, enjoyed some things that had remained from the past, their savings, and the war lasted 8 years, but no one really went hungry because of the war. But now
Huh.
it's a very serious danger.
Yeah,
More and more
definitely.
people falling into poverty and, having a very difficult life.
And that's just a great way that you put it earlier, Mariam. Neither peace nor war, that you're
Yeah.
stuck in this limbo. And it's almost, in some ways, being in this unknown state creates more anxiety and more fears and more widespread depression in the country as well, which is something that I'm hearing too from my
Yeah.
contacts. And so, Omid, I wanted to ask you, in terms of the psyche of Iranian people, has anything changed how ordinary Iranians view maybe the Islamic Republic since the war, now this MOU, and maybe Israel and the United States? What are you hearing? And I know that we're generalizing, but in general terms.
So, let me
Mm.
first, if I may, add something to your previous question for my
Please do.
I believe that if we see some people, especially the Gen Z, dancing or celebrating, having some sort of fun, it is something that, especially your non-Iranian audience, shouldn't understand that these are the type of I would call them after what Hakim Bey says, as autonomous, temporary autonomous zones. These are some sort of social uh, freedom that especially women uh, fought for years to attain, to regain, actually, to take back from the government. And um, dancing in subways and taking videos posted on social media, it is actually an act of resistance rather than just celebrating, having fun, and going with your life as everything is normal. That's the first thing. The second is that even it's a cliche if we if it's think that for example an individual with depression, with severe trauma, will never laugh, will never dance, will never have a moment of joy. So we have individual and collective trauma going on for the last couple of years in Iran, and none of them were fully and completely and effectively addressed, especially what happened during the massacre of the January and February. So this is something that we should understand. And then right after that, the whole population entered into a devastating war that eventually didn't bring them any change. So if something has changed so far, the things that changed are, first of all, I believe that the civil society in Iran are in a very fragile position at the moment because they have to, first of all, they have to work harder to give the hope and the sense of resistance back to some part of the society, if not many. And then they have to work through a lots of propagandas, lots of misunderstanding coming towards the Iranian people from all directions, especially from the West. When the war happens, there is a very good opportunity, especially for authoritarian states, to use that propaganda tool that they have at their disposal to create some sort of a false impression, false image of their population, of themselves as well. That is what happens. So they try to show that there is a unity in the Iranian people and the government. There is a unity between the Iranian regime that has been murdering their own people just a few months ago. But also what has changed is their view of the West, the way that
Mm.
they have dealt with the situation in Iran, because even those who were in supporting some sort of intervention in Iran, they were supporting a humanitarian intervention, and not necessarily even a military humanitarian intervention. And those from at least the first week to understand that this is no longer a humanitarian intervention. It is something with complete different agenda, with different type of objectives that has been pursued, and you can now see that it is something completely separated from what the Iranian people actually asked for, which was a help that could get them to deal with this regime. So the regime state that is not changed. What has changed is the faith of the Iranian people in the international community to get them the help that they need to overcome one of the most brutal states in the world, and the position of the civil society, because now the civil society has been divided, as well as the political opposition, in terms of their reaction to the war, and in terms of their solution to bring back unity to the people who are opposing this regime, who are resisting against this regime. So all of these things has changed and needs to be addressed one by one.
Wow, that's a very big deal. Mariam, to add to that, what do ordinary Iranians then think of intervention in general? Is it because it failed, like Omid said, in the sense that it didn't change the regime as they had hoped, that they no longer believe in it anymore? Do
It's
they
not
still
a
have some
matter of
hope,
belief.
or?
I think they are feeling abandoned and
Mm,
they're quite disillusioned because the promises of regime change never materialized in the quick manner that they had hoped for. And the sense of disillusionment is growing among those people who saw the war as an end to the Islamic Republic. I think a lot of people are even very angry uh, because this is not what they thought would happen. Uh, it's completely different. And, you know, they didn't think that there will be a war of this proportions, a massive war, and their lives will be so much affected by it, and it will continue. But it seems like, there is no end to it. Every day when they wake up, they have to just check to see if something new has happened, if there's been a new confrontation, a new attack somewhere. And, I hear from people that the smallest sound makes them jump because they think that, um, uh, you know, um, airplanes are back and there's going to be bombing and missiles. So it has really affected people's lives in this way. I think uh, this is not at all what people thought would happen.
yeah.
And they say it.
Yeah, and it's very different from the mood at the beginning of the military
Exactly.
strikes when it was very
No
limited and people
explaining
were celebrating.
exactly.
Yeah,
So,
it's completely changed. So
yes.
Omid, that leads me to my next question. I wanted to ask you, Omid, then what are people, I guess, given the state that Iranian people are in right now, what are they hoping for right now? What is their desire? Or do they not have the desires that they had before because they're in survival mode? How would you describe it?
Well, before I answer that, I should also mention that what we describe as a situation of the society and the people of Iran does not mean that the Iranian regime has won or was,
No.
completely intact of any damage that this war could inflict. It was devastating on the Iranian regime as well as on the Iranian people. Everything that happened with this war, and there was miscalculation on all sides regarding this war. That is something that we should all, I think, accept. Um, the regime will never ever be the same as it used to be for so many reasons. But still, the only thing that will remain intact is that it is brutal nature and its illegitimate nature. That is for sure. But the rest could change in terms of either on the worse side or slightly better. But what I believe the Iranian people will want and stay resistant in actually pursuing is, uh, first of all, and most important, is to take back their right to self-determination, their right to choose their government, their right to be a part of that whole political system that is governing them, to put it in the past in the way that Islamic regime has created as a totalitarian regime that will not give any say to the people on every single major policies, even mid-level policies in terms of the economy, the policy, the politics, the ideology that is representing the Iranian nation, everything like that has been under control of the Iranian regime, and that is what Iranians define what the Iranians would want to have a say in it, and that has not changed. And we saw that no massacre, no suppression of protests in the past has stopped them from pursuing that, coming back and asking it. But what is important is to understand that in order for the Iranian people to get back to that position, they need to once again imagine. They need to allow that a future without the Iranian regime stay in their imagination. I believe in at least in the elite. I believe that the Iranian people massively believe that this day will come. But in terms of the elite, the political elite, what I see in terms of their rhetoric is still very much dependent on the foreign forces and what they will choose for this people and this nation in this country and this regime. I believe that should change, and that is something that will affect the way that the Iranians will pursue what they always been pursuing, which is democracy, independence, and a diverse and equal society.
Yeah, and so to change their mindset, like you said, to be able to pursue it on their own without the need for foreign intervention, which was always in the back of their minds. Well, we don't have arms, we can't do it. We're going to need foreign assistance, for example.
That's absolutely true. If you look at I mean, the worst thing that I'm seeing right now is that in most of the analysis that I hear from the political elites, there is no mentioning of the plans for overthrowing this regime, and there is very little references to the will of people, to the force of people. If there are some, it's only to negate the current role of the foreign nations and foreign powers. And this has to change. We have to rebuild our mindset in a way that we will go back to what we always been pursuing, what we always been doing in terms of just fighting against totalitarianism, fighting against the tyranny, no matter who's helping us and who's not.
And this is a very emotional
Mhm.
topic. Any final concluding thoughts from either of you before we close?
I think Omid mentioned quite a lot of things, and you did too. So uh, I don't really have much to add, except that except repeating that the sense I get from people is the feeling of abandonment by the United States, by other foreign powers, uh, anxiety about the future, about the continuation of conflict, or the neither peace nor war situation, and their economic worries. When you have to work from morning till night to just make ends meet, you don't really get a lot of time to sit and think about important stuff, like what should the country's future be like. You just live from day to day and react to everything accordingly. Uh, so I think that something should happen uh, to resolve the situation. And only then can people really sit and think about what they want to do in the future, what kind of government they want to have, how they are going to achieve that, whether they want to uh, make reforms in the same government, the same regime, or they want regime change, if they want foreign intervention again, or they don't want it. But at the moment, the feeling of anxiety, disillusionment, and uh, lack of optimism somehow dominated people's lives.
And like we both said, it takes time. People are still, I mean, we're also reeling from the trauma of January 8th and 9th, and it's been
Exactly.
nonstop since then. And so much has
Over
happened
a
in
year.
just a few months.
Yeah. No, it's over a year because first there was the 12-day war in June
Yes.
last year. And from then, it is a lot of troubles that people didn't have before started, like businesses started going bankrupt, they had to shut down. A lot of people, the situation with the internet got worse and worse.
Blackout, yeah.
Yes, blackout of 3 months. It's no joke. People were so isolated during that time, and they expected help, and help never came. So it's been a long process, and the country's economic troubles are not new. Mismanagement, corruption, all of these have existed for years, decades even. Inflation has been over or about around 50%, not since last year or not in the past few months, but at least for 5 or 6 years. So troubles are deep rooted, economic troubles. They are deeply rooted in a lot of things, including mismanagement. So even if there's a deal tomorrow, it will take a long time for all these problems to be addressed and the issues to be resolved. So it's not an easy ride at all. And everybody knows that. People know
Yeah.
that, they feel it. So, yeah.
It's
If I
a
may
lot. Well,
just
thank you
add,
so much. Yeah, please do.
yeah, I would just want to say that the only way out of this is to accept that there were failures and there were huge victories
Yeah.
over the past few years. There were miscalculations, there were mismanagements in terms of our expectations from different sides and powers and forces. But at the same time, there were huge victories, and if we are to go back to a situation where healing begins and then the resistance will restart itself, it will come out of the, understanding where the failure originates and where the victories were made. I believe that the women's rights movement was victorious. They took back some of the fundamental rights that has been taken from them for decades, and no government could take it back again, and they will not take it back again. Even under the situation of war and massacre, they could not do that. It doesn't mean that they haven't been trying. So I believe that if we look at where we were um, kind of, stronger and where we were weaker, then we can understand how this society can rebuild itself, how can healing begins. And more importantly, I personally learned from the whole situation that you won't fight tyranny with tyranny, you fight tyranny with solidarity, you fight reactionary regimes with progressive mindset and not with another reactionary approach. So it was something we took from this, we learned from this, and we also gained a lot from this. We just need to invest on those gains.
Well, thank you for embracing the positive. It's good to end on a good note. Thank you so much to you both, Omid Shams and Mariam Sinai, for joining me today on Eye for Iran. The IRGC is moving to seize St. Peter's Evangelical Church in Tehran. Families connected to the church, which is approximately 20 families, are facing eviction and could lose their homes. Joining me now is Mansour Borji. He's the advocacy director of Article 18, which is an organization supporting Christians inside Iran. Thank you so much for being here, Mansour.
Thank you for having me, Nigar.
It's a very important and concerning topic. Tell us about St. Peter Evangelical Church and its history inside of Iran and the importance of that with Iran's Christian history as well.
Sure. Thank you for this opportunity. First, let me set some records right and think the IRGC involvement was perhaps miscommunicated since we have contact with reliable sources inside. We hear that the entity that is behind all of this is Iran's Ministry of Intelligence, although there is a rivalry between these different security entities and in their crackdown on Christians. But in this special case...
And overlap, sadly, too.
Absolutely, absolutely. So in this case, Iran's Ministry of Intelligence has been behind it, and it's been something ongoing. Let me just start with your question about the history of this church, which is one of the most significant and historical churches built in 1872 by American Presbyterian missionaries. And it's one of the first Persian-speaking churches in modern history. That means it's not producing or providing services in Armenian or Assyrian for ethnic minorities, but uses the national language of Persian so that it's accessible for all Iranians. And that's where the problem arises after the Islamic Revolution of 1979. In fact, hours after the revolutionaries took power, the churches, especially evangelical or Protestant churches, were targeted. Many of their properties confiscated. Their leadership were under pressure to allow the revolutionaries to seize their assets. And this has been an ongoing policy for the past 4 decades. And we've seen this gradually, especially after the ending of the war with Iraq, in a very gradual and step-by-step suffocation of the church. In this very church, central Tehran, it's a huge compound, by the way, and some people have questioned, why do we have people living there? In this compound, you had 2 schools that were built by missionaries in a time that public education and modern education was not something common, and these schools were the first of this whole property to be confiscated, although they remained school for a while. Then there is a residential building, offices of the Secretariat of the Council of Evangelical Churches in Iran, and also the Iranian Bible Society, which translated, published, and distributed Bible, and that was
Wow.
closed down in 1990, February 1990. In fact, in response to UN Special Rapporteur, which inquires about the closure, the Iranian representatives claimed that it was after because of some legal disputes, and it would be reopened as soon as these disputes, and this has remained closed. And furthermore, I think it was 2009 or 2008, where the church was under a lot of pressure to cease its services in Persian language and only allow Armenian and Assyrian ethnics to participate in their meetings. And that's what I call the policy of gradual elimination of Persian-speaking Christianity. And that's been going on, and now it's climaxed in the actual takeover of the building. Perhaps different reasons are contributing to this final conclusion.
Tell us about the reasons. And I mean, you mentioned it's a big compound. My understanding is it's worth tens of millions of dollars in real estate as well, which is an important factor, I would assume. But also give us some context for people who don't understand. In Iran, the way that Christian converts are treated is presumably different than that of the ethnic minorities, like you mentioned, the Assyrians and the Armenians, which technically in Iranian law are people of the book and are supposed to be protected. Although I should say that's not the case in reality, although that is the official law there. So give us some context about why a Persian language church is such a threat to the Islamic Republic itself.
I think you pointed out the dilemma here. The word evangelical is a giveaway in the name itself. Iranian government capitalizes on in finding legitimacy internationally by portraying itself as very tolerant of religious minorities, points out the number of churches that there exist and a couple of representatives in the parliament. But in reality, those are all very limiting, because although the constitution does not specify any restrictions on the language used, but that has been a practice by the Iranian government. So the churches that hold services in any of those particular languages, Armenian and Assyrian, for traditional historical churches, they're allowed some level of freedom in their worship, although they also face incredible discrimination, and their numbers have shrunk from probably 300,000 early days of the revolution to now probably less than 100,000, although the population has almost tripled. So that's the case with the more recognized Christian groups. But now the majority of estimated 800,000 Christians are converts to Christianity.
800,000, wow, that's a big number.
More conservative estimates.
Yes.
And that's been on the rise for many years. And this is something that is testified by people in the government. And since 2008, I think former Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei was one of the first to sound alarm of the rise of Christianity, although he contributed that to the conspiracies of the enemies of the state and Islam. But nevertheless, his alarm was picked up by the security apparatus, the IRGC, Iran's Ministry of Intelligence. And that's when the widespread crackdown on evangelical Christians who specifically use local languages. And we say Persian speaking, but it could be Azeri, it could be Kurdish, or any other languages spoken by Iran's many different ethnic groups. And so they have a particular concern about people converting to Christianity, and instead of perhaps seeking reasons why, they try to wipe out the churches that offer these services. And this is just one factor. I think you need to look at other factors as well. It's a deeply corrupt system, and this has been spoken about not just by opposition but inside. For many years, there's been talks about the more vulnerable parts of the society being exploited by security institutions that are way powerful. And this could be with the Baha'is, with Christians, Jewish community, and everybody else whose possessions and public institutions can be easily seized. And that's been the case. So that's one people who are looking at this as an opportunity to make money. Perhaps the war and the chaos that followed is another reason that they are moving towards confiscation of Christians' properties. Although the church was built by American missionaries, but later on, its ownership was transferred to local indigenous Iranians, and that's been the case ever since. They were even registered under the Council of Evangelical Churches after the Islamic Revolution in 1980. But since then, that registration was revoked and never allowed to register again, despite promises that were made to the international community, to international church bodies like World Council of Churches, but that promise never came true. We hear now that it was because of direct obstruction by the offices of Iranian Supreme Leader.
And like you mentioned, this speaks to a broader issue of the persecution of religious minorities in general in Iran. And of course, conversion is a crime that is punishable by death.
Well, in legal Islamic jurisprudence, yes, but for very pragmatic reasons and how this could come against Iran's international obligation, that's been muted. So that means it's there. The threat is hanging over their heads of any converts, but in reality, they don't want that many negative publicity because the number of converts is incredibly high. You can't just exit every single one of them. So that's why, especially since 2008, they're using a lot more politically sounding charges against them, against the converts, instead of killing people for apostasy, which they did. In 1990, Reverend Hossein Soodmand, a pastor of the church in Mashhad, and by the way, another evangelical church in Mashhad was demolished just a couple of weeks ago. And so, and that trend continued for a number of years, but that is now replaced by a more security approach to the church.
Yeah, it's horrific. I actually have a friend who's a Syrian Iranian, and her father in the early 90s, they couldn't find him, and then they found him, unfortunately, in the forest, and he had been hanged to death for being a reverend in the local community up north in northern Iran. Just absolutely horrific. And her family then fled to South Korea.
Yes, you're referring to Pastor Ravan Bakhsh, who was one of the few that were killed in what is now called the chain murders that the Iranian Ministry of Intelligence was behind it.
And when it comes to, you've been obviously documenting this for a number of years now, but what is your own personal story, Mansour, and your own journey?
Well, I was part of one of these evangelical churches in Iran. As a teenager, I ended up doing my own research and attended the church for a year, struggling with doubts and whatever. And then eventually became a Christian and baptized, and was a member of that church. So when for studying theology, I ended up in the United Kingdom. While I was studying theology, I came across the news on the bill that was presented to the parliament penalizing apostasy with death. So I realized this is a major threat, not just against Christians, but anybody who would reject the very narrow definition of being a Muslim by the state. And those days, there was a Muslim scholar who had given a speech, and he was branded as an apostate, and they were calling for his execution. So we realized this is a risk to all Iranians, and I've been ever since saying that freedom of religion and or belief is not just for people who are believers, it's for people who do not want to have any beliefs. And this right, it's a fundamental right that is being stolen away from every Iranian, and it has to be recognized and opposed, because a society cannot flourish. Imagine a country of Iran being deprived of its Baha'is contribution, of its Christians and Jewish and even atheists, just because their beliefs does not align with the government of Iran. Even many of the Shias, you've got prisoners who are Muslim clergymen whose understanding or teachings are different from that of the state. So that's when I realized the risk, and that's how I changed my perhaps unintentionally to more of an advocacy, because I realized this is a threat that cannot be ignored.
That's amazing that you're doing what you do and helping people back home in Iran. It's very important work, Mansour. And to close, I wanted to ask you, we talked about the importance of, international standing, coming out of the war, signing this MOU, this Memorandum of Understanding. Then why now? Why would they do something like this right now?
Well, I think that there are people who are more pragmatic within the regime who would not want to mess with anything that would come in between a good agreement with the Western allies. Just a couple of days ago, the UN Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in Iran already warned that any agreement with Iran should not ignore the realities of human rights in Iran. And of course, those who are negotiating will consider that. But there are others who oppose any of these agreements because their interest lies on continuous hostility against the West. So that could be a part of the reason. But what happens behind the scene, as I said, they're multi-layered. And it is the international community that should not tolerate this sort of behavior from a country that is signatory to the International Covenant of Civil and Political Rights, to many of the other human rights documents. If they want to play in this world arena, they have to respect the rules. And one of them is to respect the most fundamental right of people to exercise their beliefs as they wish to.
And you mentioned that this is a Ministry of Intelligence and not the IRGC. Do they feel emboldened right now? Is when it comes to the why now, do they feel like they've been strengthened and that they're the winners coming out of this war?
Very much so. I think every year we produce an annual report together with some other international organization focusing on freedom of religious and belief. But then we have alarmed the increased involvement of IRGC in dealing with religious minorities, and in particular Christians. And IRGC does not get involved unless they identify a group or a group activity as a threat against the Islamic State. So that tells you already how they
That's
look
interesting.
at Christians and Christian activities. Secondly, after the war, you see a rhetoric that is calling for seizure of assets of anybody who participated in protests, or the remaining part of the system is considering it a threat, or not completely aligning with their policies. So we see people who are being sports people, sports personality, or actors, or ordinary people, and now Christians. When you see head of the judiciary is calling for the courts to not hesitate on seizure of property of those who they call the enemy of the Islamic State, that's no surprise. So I think the aftermath of the war is being emboldening some aspect of the regime in taking these measures.
And this is a church and a community that you are deeply connected to, Mansour. How does it feel watching this process unfold from afar?
Well, we feel sympathy with those who are calling for help. There are many people. This is being part of their not only a worship place, but a community, a sense of identity they took from participating in its meeting. Their lives have transformed. And beyond that, I think if we look at it nationally, this is a national heritage. This is destruction of part of Iranian identity that has a church. The first Persian-speaking church in modern history is now being taken over and repurposed, like the one in Mashhad, like the one in Kerman and other places that the Iranian government has taken over. So it's really, really painful, and it's also a betrayal of Iran's rich national heritage.
And when you say repurpose, what do they do to the churches?
Like, for instance, the property in Kerman was demolished, and they built several story buildings sold to private owners. So it's an extortion and money-making mechanism. The House of Bishop, Iran, believe it or not, once had a convert who raised to become the Bishop of Iran and Middle East, whose son was killed just a couple of years after the revolution, and he had to face exile. But then his whole compound was confiscated and later on transformed into a museum. Now they have demolished the church in Mashhad. They say, of course, we can't even believe that they want to use that land to build a place for international, interfaith dialogue. An interfaith dialogue built on a property that is being illegitimately confiscated and demolished from a faith group.
It's, and this government claims to be religious and respectful of Christians. Absolutely disgusting. I wish you all the best. Thank you so much, Mansour Borji, for advocating and raising awareness today with us on Eye for Iran.
Thank you.
Well, if you like this episode, you can hit the like button, leave us a comment, let us know what you think, and sign up for our weekly briefing newsletter at iranintl.com/newsletter. You can also check out our dedicated English website at iranintl.com/en.